us yet again. God, man. Hello, my name is Brooks Turcotte, and my topic for my timeline project was trucking. So this is the evolution of trucking. Trucking is a crucial link to global trade. Trucking is essential for connecting manufacturers to distributors, and then to the consumer, us. Trucking also supports just-in-time logistics and e-commerce and globalization. Just about over 80% of the freight in the United States is moved by truck. Today we'll talk about Damlin's first truck, the diesel motor, the technology advancements like the diesel engine, and how it's changed over the years from the 1800s to now, GPS and ELDs, federal legislation and deregulation, electronic trucks, autonomous trucking, and green ideas for trucking. To start, the origins of trucking. Damlin's first motor truck was kind of like a wagon. I believe it was a Mercedes style car. And it was a 2-cylinder, 4 horsepower diesel motor that had roughly, I think the top speed was 7.5 miles per hour. And you can see here is a photo of the diesel motor. You can see how it works, and there's an in-depth drawing there from 1886. Trucking had a lot of challenges early on in the early 1900s. The roads weren't designed for trucks that we have today. There was dirt roads, gravel roads, brick roads, you name it. So this made it hard for trucks to even move down the roads, made the trucks more unreliable, and made the estimated time of shipping couldn't be estimated because they could have had a flat tire from a rock that they hit or whatnot. At this time, only less than 10% of roads in America were paved. Trucking has a lot of advantages. One being able to get the package right to the customer's door, versus like trains. They can only go from New York to Philly, but how do you get to the suburbs of Philly? Trucking is what made that possible. It is very flexible, and is crucial to the supply chain today. Alexander Winton, who's a Scottish-American car maker from Cleveland, Ohio. He made cars, and he's kind of the inventor here. He is the inventor of what we call today the semi-trailer. He had a problem when he would manufacture cars in Cleveland, and people in New York wanted his car, his product, but if he drives it there, the over 500-mile trip, that's 500 miles of wear on the vehicle. And at that time, that was probably a lot of mileage to be putting on a brand new car. So he made what is called a changing capacity kit. You can see here in this picture, one of his vehicles that he made in Cleveland loaded up on this trailer. So this made it easier to, first of all, load the goods, and then also transport them over a longer distance. Today, over 80% of freight is moved via semi-trucks, and he is the reason for it. You can see here in the photo, it says the Winton Motor Carriage Company right here, and yeah. So infrastructure and road development. So the first legislation was in 1916. It was called the Federal Aid Road Act. This helped put money into making roads and developing them into kind of what they are today. This was a $75 million project, and from when it started to about 1920, the number of roads grew by 5%, and the number of trucks rose from 10,000 to over 1 million in just 20 years. This made the supply chain more flexible, and really was able to supply the customers with real-time delivery, and giving them a very good estimate of when a product could get there. The Federal Motor Carrier Act of 1935. This was to help regulate freight rates, routes, and pay rates. So before this, the industry is booming with trucking. You're able to get, anything you want, anywhere you need, in towns, nearby states, and whatnot. So at this point, firms are kind of going off the rails with making their own rates and letting, people decide, what rates they want to go with. But with rates just keep going up, it makes it unreliable for the consumer. So the government started to use the ICC, which is the Interstate Commerce Commission, to help facilitate this problem. They already overlooked trains and trucking, but they really were only looking at the trains because train was the main form of moving goods. So at this point, they were able to improve safety for the operations of the vehicle, for the drivers, and made it more restrictive guidelines for the companies to follow. The ICC unintentionally made it harder for the small guy to compete, because the small guys didn't have the required licenses or the funding that they needed to do this, where the big guys, they had all this money and people working for them that could get these licenses, that could afford them. So the ICC unintentionally kind of made a monopoly on the trucking industry. This brings us to World War II. So World War II, trucks were very important for the transportation of troops, goods, ammunition, food, supplies, you name it, moved by truck. It was a lot more versatile than railroads, because most military bases weren't right next to the railroad, for obvious reasons. This gave an opportunity to give trucking the edge, and trucking firms to show how effective trucking can be. It was easy to load up a ship in America full of trucks loaded with supplies, and then once they get to port, to quickly get off and drive to the bases. And during this time, this also promoted industrialization, building trucks to the government standards to be able to help win a war. After the war, they were responsible for helping rebuild cities that were destroyed, and a solution for growth of suburbs areas. The interstate, what we call the highway today. In 1956, President Eisenhower wanted to create a highway system, kind of like the Autobahn in Germany, which was what inspired him to do this, to help. First of all, he thought of it as a defense mechanism for, if we were ever under attack, how could we quickly move the military? And at this point, we had no way to do that. So he created the highway system, which could make it easier for us to move military from, New York all the way to California, and back and whatnot. So it made it really easy to move the military, but this also helped the trucking industry tremendously, because before this, trucks would have to get off in small towns. The highway would only last 20 miles, and then they'd have to get off and go through a small town for 40 miles of rocky road, which made the vehicle still unreliable. So this really helped the trucking industry. This also helped lower the cost of operating for the industry, and it really just helped the industry grow as a whole. Technology and labor. So in the 60s through the 80s, diesel engines were made more efficient to go longer distances and be more reliable. So this helped with, first of all, fuel efficiency. So before, say a truck could only go 100 miles, now the trucks can go up to 200 miles, and so on, even more than that. So this really helps them go longer and deliver the goods quicker. Air suspension systems were also introduced at this time. It helped with driver fatigue, keeping the driver, being able to drive longer distances, making it more comfortable for the driver. And then it also helped with cargo damage, reduce the number of cargo damages that could happen with these systems. ABS, anti-locking brake systems, were also introduced. This helped tremendously with safety and lowering, risks of accidents that could happen and whatnot. Also, at this time, labor unions were starting to form in the trucking industry. So the International Brotherhood of Teamsters was created to help with creating better wages, better working environments, and industry standards. So this brings us into the Motor Carrier Act of 1980, deregulation. This kind of goes back to the first regulations that they kind of put into, but the government reduced its control over the industry as a whole. They reduced the control over freight rates, routes, etc. They also encouraged new competition across America from firms, not just using the big guys, but being able to use the small guys with lowering wages for drivers. It also provided consumers with numerous opportunities with the rates going down. Manufacturers that couldn't necessarily afford to outsource their transportation, they'd be able to then hire some companies. The digital age and globalization. This is the 90s to the 2000s. This is when GPS technology really took off. It helped with route planning, real-time tracking of shipments. There's also electronic logging devices, ELDs they're called, which replaced paper logbooks to help enforce hours for drivers. So that truck drivers could, drive say 12 hours in a day versus driving 16 hours and risking falling asleep at the wheel and causing an accident. Electronic logging devices became mandatory in 2017, and this reduced the number of accidents tremendously. GPS and ELDs combined helped save trucking companies 10 to 15% of fuel costs and 12% fewer crashes and 50% decrease in DOS, hours of service, violations. So with these systems, you're able to track the number of hours a driver can drive and make sure they're in compliance with the rules. Right here you can see what an EDL looks like. You can see that there's many different parts. There's vehicle information, whether it's tire pressure, oil pressure, all that, driver information, messaging from your employer, maybe the shipment's changed. This really makes it a lot easier for the driver and their dispatching unit to communicate. And this way they can see real time in the office what's going on in the truck, what problems could be happening, or how many hours the driver's driving. With the growth of trade agreements and cross-border trucking, like Canada to the United States to Canada, US to Mexico, and vice versa, the trade agreements really helped boost the trucking industry. This also brought a rise to just-in-time logistics shipping. Like Amazon is a great example of a company that has fast shipping and shows, they're making it as needed. Trucking and freight tonnage grew by 23% from 2000 to 2010, which is drastic. Sustainability and smart trucks. So from 2010 to now, electric vehicles have been a big part of today's talk. But in 2010, the EPA had created regulations on nitrous oxide emissions. So back in 2010, you drive by trucks and you look at their stacks and they'd be covered in black soot or smoke, or they'd be going down a hill and smoke's billowing out the top, which is not great for our environment and the communities that they drive through. So this regulation really helped crack down on this. This led to cleaner diesel engines that that now use selective catalytic reduction technology, also known as SCR. And then this kind of goes back into what I was talking to earlier about electronic trucks. Companies like Tesla and Nikola developed long-range electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles. So this is kind of still in the works, but we see it today with electric vehicles all over the road. With electric vehicles, this kind of morphs into autonomous trucking. Autonomous trucking is trucking without a driver. So relying on basic technologies like AI or camera systems to move freight without a person being there. So companies like Embark and TuSimple are kind of leading this innovation. In 2022, TuSimple fully drove an autonomous truck down public roads safely, no accidents, no nothing. And this has another potential to save 10 to 15% in fuel by using electric. But on the other side, you have to look at electric trucks are 115% more expensive up front, and we don't really know the longevity of them. Another problem that we'd have is now across the country we only have about 2,000 charging stations for trucks. If we really wanted to do this, you would need up to 30,000 charging stations. So making those alone would be difficult to put them in, and having a power grid that could support all this are still things that we're seeing today, trying to figure those out. So as we've seen here is trucking has gone through many different changes, from dirt roads to highways, from a diesel motor to autonomous trucking powered by AI. We've seen legislation crack down on the industry, and then we've also seen the government kind of back off and let the firms do the work. We've also seen a change in supply chains, showing how trucking is very important for the supply chain. As you can see, I've been saying it over and over, is 80% of American freight is moved by trucks. Trucks are also crucial to just-in-time transportation and global trade. The industry faces environmental pushes starting in 2010 to now, and this will continue to change and evolve as time goes on. Success will depend on how willing and able the industry is to adapt and the sustainability of the changes. So thank you very much, and this is the evolution of trucking. Here are our sources. Thank you very much.